We are following several developing stories, including the government shutdown fight, as we're just hours away from hitting another critical and potentially devastating inflection point, with Americans grappling with questions about whether they will be able to afford their basic needs, including food and health care. Starting tomorrow, the U.S. Department of Agriculture says SNAP benefits, previously known as food stamps, will run dry, leaving some 42 million people, or about 1 in 8 Americans, facing concerns about food insecurity. Earlier this week, more than a dozen states sued the administration over its suspension of SNAP benefits. And this afternoon, there were 2 separate court rulings, one ordering the administration to use emergency contingency funds to prevent a lapse in benefits, and another ruling that the administration's withholding of benefits is likely unlawful. Meanwhile, tomorrow also marks the start of Obamacare open enrollment, where millions of Americans are facing likely sticker shock, with premiums expected to more than double as ACA subsidies are set to expire at the end of the year. Remember, that's what this fight is all about. With the consequences of the shutdown beginning to pile up, President Trump is doubling down on his message, pinning the blame on Democrats who are demanding an extension of those health care subsidies. Take a look.
The Democrats just don't know what they're doing. I don't know what's wrong with them. They've never done a thing like this. They've become crazed lunatics. All they have to do is say, let's go, let's open up our country, and everything snaps back into shape. They have to open up the country. It's their fault. Everything is their fault.
It comes after President Trump also urged Senate Republicans to take a more controversial action, ending the filibuster in the Senate. That's the rule that requires 60 votes to move legislation. And amid it all, on Thursday, I sat down with California Governor Gavin Newsom for a Sunday exclusive on Meet the Press, and I asked him about what's happening in Washington and the Democrat strategy. Take a look. Democrats in Washington believe they have found a winning issue in their battle over health care. The government shutdown, now the second longest in U.S. history. Democrats essentially saying any bill to reopen the government has to include an extension of health care subsidies, which are set to expire at the end of the year. Do you believe Democrats have picked the right fight?
Well, I'd say you're welcome to America. I mean, rural and red states that are disproportionately the beneficiaries of the Democrat stance. We're fighting for the people that voted not just for our party and our values and principles, but voted for Donald Trump and his party. We have their back. Donald Trump has betrayed them. He's turned their back. The Republicans in Congress have turned their back. So absolutely, your question, absolutely it's the right issue, because it breaks through at a time of great economic anxiety. The idea that you're going to face a 1 to 3+100% increase in your premiums in a matter of months is the issue that defines more issues in more ways on more days for more Americans. So it's absolutely the right call.
And yet federal workers are suffering. The lines are getting longer outside of food banks. Some 5 million Californians stand to potentially lose food assistance. Yeah. What do you say to those 5 million Californians who are afraid their families are going to go hungry, and they want Democrats to get together with Republicans and reopen the government?
I think it's a disgrace. The USDA's never done this in the past. They said they have a contingency fund for precisely this moment. They said just a few days ago, on November 30th, or rather September 30th, that the contingency fund exists for a moment like this, a likely government shutdown. So there's you're right, 5.5 million Americans that live in my home state that will be impacted by the decision, the choice by the Trump administration to cut this program during Thanksgiving. And those same people will face unprecedented prices for beef and coffee and other basic goods, just as they're facing unprecedented costs for candy, up 10.8% for Halloween. And what we will all experience is this war on Christmas and the cost of toys because of Trump's recklessness on this massive sales tax increase of working families and blue-collar workers called tariffs.
And you can catch my full interview with Governor Gavin Newsom this Sunday on Meet the Press. Joining me now is NBC News senior national political reporter Sahil Kapur on Capitol Hill. And here with me on set is NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba and NBC News legal affairs reporter Gary Grumbach. Thanks to all of you for being here. Monica, let me start with you. I had the opportunity to interview Kevin Hassett. We're going to have that coming up. I asked him if the administration would comply with these court rulings, which effectively say the administration has to pay these SNAP benefits. He tried to pivot and place the blame on Democrats. I'm not sure I got a straight answer. Have you gotten a straight answer? Is the administration going to comply?
I'm not sure that they've come up with their own exact answer on how they're going to respond to this, because there is the political messaging on this, which is exactly as you say, to try to continue to blame Democrats. But then there's also the actual legal compliance question here. And if a federal judge is saying that they need to dip into the $5 billion that they do have in this sort of rainy day fund, then it does seem like the Department of Agriculture would have to do that. The mechanism for that is a little bit uncertain in terms of how those people, millions of people who rely on SNAP benefits, can actually get their debit cards, which is the way that they use it, reloaded with that money. And is that something that can happen very quickly? A bit unclear. We know that that lapses tomorrow. So the administration, for its part, as we heard Kevin Hassett indicate, said, well, if we have to do this, they're not going to be happy about it. But it sounds like they might relent and do that and follow, again, what this court, what this judge is ruling. But you can still expect to hear the same messaging, which is that they believe, and they will continue to argue, this is the fault of the Democrats. They want the government to reopen, and they want to do that by passing a clean continuing resolution. Democrats, for their part, say they're not ready to blink on this yet.
Yeah, neither side is moving, Gary. Break down these two court rulings that we have gotten. What are the implications, and could we see the Trump administration try to appeal?
So we've seen two different cases here, one out of Massachusetts and one out of Rhode Island. The judge in Massachusetts did not go nearly as far as the judge in Rhode Island did. What she said in Massachusetts was essentially, hey, get back to me by Monday on whether or not you could perhaps do a few $1 billion in SNAP, do part of the SNAP benefits for some of these states that were impacted. The judge in Rhode Island said, this is illegal. You absolutely need to fund fully with any sort of contingency funding. And if the contingency funds run out, essentially he said, figure it out, find the money, and make sure these people are fed. I want to read one quick quote for you from this judge's ruling. He says, it's clear that when compared to the millions of people that will go without funds for food versus the agency's desire to not use the contingency funds in the case there's a hurricane need, the balances of those equities clearly goes on sides of the people that need to be fed. So clearly that's where his focus were, the millions of Americans that rely on these benefits.
Well, it will be fascinating to watch this play out legally. And in terms of the messaging, Monica, as you say, all sides are dug in. Sahil, let me go to you on that point, because this is a real pressure point for lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. And yet, as you heard Monica lay out, instead of hearing about negotiations or compromise, both sides are increasingly pointing the finger and digging in.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Kristen. And there are certainly some lawmakers on Capitol Hill who are relieved by this court decision. I mean, talk about innocent victims of the government shutdown. 40 million low-income Americans would lose SNAP benefits if that cutoff happens tomorrow. That includes more than 1 in 5 children. By some estimates, Democrats in particular are more vocal about their support for using that contingency fund than Republicans are. Take a look at this reaction from Senator Chuck Schumer, the minority leader, who says the court ruling is good, that the president's decision, in his words, to cut off SNAP was vindictive and heartless, and he accuses the president of trying to manufacture a hunger crisis so he wouldn't negotiate with Democrats on the issue of the Affordable Care Act. There are a couple of open questions here. First, as Gary just alluded to, is there going to be an appeal? Which way is that appeal going to go? And is the administration going to continue arguing in court that they can't use that funding? The second issue is, how long will that $5 billion contingency fund even last? I've heard some estimates from senators on Capitol Hill that it could be as much as 3 weeks. Maybe it is, maybe it's less, but is the government going to be open by then? Nobody really knows. Lastly, Kristen, I was very struck by something Governor Newsom told you in that interview. He talked about how Republican voters, MAGA voters, are going to be some of the biggest beneficiaries of these programs like SNAP and ACA. He's absolutely right about that. This is not 10 years ago when Democrats were overwhelmingly winning low-income voters. Donald Trump has pretty much broken even, clawed back about 20 points worth of deficit from Mitt Romney in terms of the lowest income voters. So his own constituents, his own rather biggest supporters, would be very negatively affected by this.
And that's yet another pressure point, Sahil. You're absolutely right. Gary, Sahil raises the perspective that, yes, there could still be an appeals process. What would that look like? How long would it play out?
Well, this could be a weeks-long process, but what is interesting here is because both judges in Rhode Island and Massachusetts are in the same circuit court, it'll be a circuit court looking at both of those decisions, and that will actually play a role here. Both those decisions could have an impact on what ends up happening here because the circuit court has jurisdiction over them.
Monica, the other big news today is President Trump's call to Republicans to get rid of the filibuster. It's an indication that he is starting to feel some of the pressure, arguably. What are your sources telling you about the strategy behind that and about the reaction so far?
This is something that President Trump occasionally likes to float when he feels like there is something that he would like to see done. And time and again, we see Republican leadership respond and say, not so fast. I don't think that there is an appetite to do that. I'm not sure that that is something that we could do or want to risk, because as soon as you do eliminate that 60-vote threshold, well, what could it apply to on some other important pieces of legislation or other votes? It's certainly a bit of a gamble, and it sets it up, depending on, of course, whatever happens in next year's midterms, to be a potential issue for whatever next party is in power. So this is a conversation that happens from time to time. Again, the president saying that he would like to do that, to reopen the government, to move on, because I do think there is a bit of a squeeze here that the White House, Republicans, Democrats, all involved are feeling about how does this end. And the president can throw out an idea like that, but again, that's not one that seems like it's going to get very far.
Well, it doesn't. And Sahil, as Monica is saying, you do have Republican leadership saying not so fast. House Speaker Mike Johnson weighing in.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think President Trump's call for Republicans to abolish the filibuster was met with some immediate resistance, which you don't see very often here on Capitol Hill. Senator John Thune and John Barrasso, the number 1 and 2 Republican senators, remain opposed to abolition of the filibuster. Their offices tell us today, in response to Trump calling on them to do just that. There are some other Republicans who've weighed in, like John Curtis as well, the senator, first-term senator from Utah, says he's a firm no on removing the filibuster. Republicans have taken this position for quite some time now, at least on the legislative filibuster. And, you know, the reason has nothing to do with tradition or institutionalism. That's the argument they make. But the real reason, Kristen, is power. They are worried about what a Democratic trifecta would do and very likely could do if they come to power without the ability of Republicans to stop them. A whole host of issues that even the last 50-50 Senate would have done, but for the filibuster, passed a major voting rights bill. They would have codified abortion rights. They would have raised the minimum wage. They would have passed the DREAM Act. I could go on and on and on. Republicans don't want to live in that world, and they don't want to open the door for it. So, look, could it change? Of course it could. Trump has a way of getting what he wants around here on Capitol Hill, but at this moment, he has nowhere near enough votes to abolish the filibuster.
And Monica, as we watch and wait to see what happens there, final question to you. Apparently the White House has a plan to pay members of the military again?
Yeah, for the second time during the course of this shutdown, which is, of course, now about a month in. They're now drawing from some legislative funds that were appropriated for the president's so-called One Big Beautiful Bill that would have been used for military housing. They're also using some funds from the Pentagon's own research and development account and procurement account. They're combining all of that into a pot of about $5 billion that will be able to pay military and service members and troops today, but there's no guarantee that if this stretches on, they can keep doing it, though it does seem they've been able to cobble it together before, so who knows?
All right. Well, guys, we've covered a lot of ground here. Thank you, Monica, Gary, and Sahil. Great start to the show. Really appreciate it.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.